Two armies, one nation, one people, two world wars separated by only 25 years. The First Army fought the entire globe for 4 years and nearly achieved total victory. The Second Army conquered half of Europe in 2 years, then collapsed so violently that the state itself vanished from the map. Both shared the same German efficiency and the same rigid military tradition. History suggests Nazi Germany in 1939 was a superior force compared to Imperial Germany in 1914. The logic seems clear. Better technology, advanced tactics, Blitzkrieg versus the stalemate of the trenches. But the raw data tells a different story. When you analyze industrial capacity and long-term sustainability, the assumption of Nazi superiority begins to fail. Which Germany was actually stronger? At first glance, the Third Reich. But in reality, the Kaiser's empire was a much more stable machine. The numbers don't lie. Success in war requires more than just fast tanks. It requires the ability to survive when everything goes wrong. Imperial Germany possessed that endurance. Nazi Germany did not. The footage shows a specific image. Panzer divisions are rolling into Poland. Stuka dive bombers are screaming through the sky. This looks like the future of warfare, but the camera pans back to reveal the truth. Directly behind those modern tanks, 750,000 horses are pulling supply wagons. Horses in 1939. The sound of hooves on pavement follows the roar of the engines. This image reveals the gap between real power and the illusion of power. The Nazi war machine was a high-tech tip on a primitive spear. It got worse as the lines grew longer. Events accelerated quickly once the first shots were fired. To understand why one empire lasted years and the other disintegrated, we must look at the starting point. We begin at the moment of mobilization. August 1914. This was the peak of the German Empire. The EEO. There was no turning back. Thus began the comparison. August 1914. Germany mobilizes for war. At this moment, the German Empire holds the second most powerful economy on Earth. Only the United States produces more goods. German industry dominates the European continent. The factories are loud. The chimneys never stop smoking. 17.6 million tons of steel leave German mills annually. The numbers tell the story. Britain produces only 7.8 million tons. France manages 4.6 million. Russia lags behind at 4.2 million. In a war of attrition, metal is king. Germany has the crown. The country is the global leader in chemicals. It produces everything from advanced dyes and pharmaceuticals to synthetic fertilizers. When the world needs precision machinery, optical instruments, or electrical equipment, they look to Berlin. The labels always read, "Made in Germany." Why was the Kaiser so confident? At first glance, a nation of poets, but in reality, a continental fortress. The currency is backed by gold. Government debt remains manageable. The banks are stable. Germany is self-sufficient in coal and grows most of its own food. The military reflects this economic muscle. 800,000 men serve in peacetime, but this was only the beginning. The German army needs just 12 days to expand from 800,000 to 3.5 million soldiers. Total mobilization reaches 3.8 million men. The sound of boots on cobblestones fills every city. The rail network is the most advanced in Europe. Engineers built it for one purpose: to move massive armies to any front within days. Artillery is excellent. Logistics are methodical. In the footage, trains loaded with Krupp cannons move toward the borders every 10 minutes. There was no mistake in the planning. Germany has real allies. The Austro-Hungarian Empire adds 50 million people to the alliance. Its industrial capacity is limited compared to the German machine. Most of the territory remains agricultural. Only Bohemia and parts of Hungary have modern factories. But it is still a great power with a capable military. The Ottoman Empire provides geographic reach. It controls the gates to the east and vital resources. Events accelerated. The map of the world was about to change. The machinery of war was now in motion. September 1st, 1939, German forces crossed the Polish border. In London, crowds gather around newsstands, reading headlines in total silence. In New York, the neon lights of Times Square flicker as thousands stop to watch the latest newsreels. The world is witnessing a new type of conflict, Blitzkrieg, lightning war. 5 weeks pass and the Polish state ceases to exist. To every observer, Germany looks invincible. But the newsreels hide a desperate reality. Germany is running out of time. This isn't measured in years, but in months. The Nazi economy is propped up by a massive credit fraud known as Mifo bills. This financial scheme allowed the regime to hide 12 billion Reichsmarks in debt. For comparison, the entire volume of standard government bonds at the time is 19 billion. The books are cooked. These unreported debts are about to come due, and the German treasury is empty. There is no cash to pay the creditors, but the financial collapse is only the first crisis. General Georg Thomas is the Chief of Staff for the Army Weapons Office. Later, he will lead the Defense Economy and Armament Office. Before the invasion of Poland, Thomas conducts a full audit of German stockpiles. He delivers a report to General Halder. The data is devastating. The numbers are clear. The German military has only 2 months of fuel oil and petrol in reserve. The tanks will stop moving 60 days after the first shot. The ammunition stocks are equally low. The warehouses hold enough shells for a quick strike, but nothing for a prolonged war. Events are moving fast. At first glance, the Wehrmacht is a juggernaut, but in reality, it is a machine running on fumes. The footage from 1939 shows columns of trucks and tanks moving east. The camera records smiling soldiers and polished equipment, but the logistics tell a different story. 1 month of heavy fighting would consume every scrap of rubber and drop of oil in the country. There was no margin for error. The German high command knew the risk. If the war didn't end quickly, the economy would implode. There was no turning back. The invasion was not a choice made from strength. It was a gamble to seize resources before the bills came due. The clock was ticking. Thus began the Second World War. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel reads the report. He does not share it. He suppresses the findings immediately. Keitel orders General Georg Thomas to remain silent. The command is clear. Never speak of these numbers again. The data is a death sentence for the regime. Germany is an industrial giant on life support. The country imports almost all of its oil. It relies on foreign shipments for rubber, copper, and tungsten. These are the strategic materials of modern war. Without them, the gears stop turning. Domestic production of iron ore is failing to meet demand. The Reich is forced to buy from Sweden just to keep the steel mills running. The shortage is not limited to metal and fuel. Food rationing begins in August 1939. The war hasn't even started, yet the civilian plates are already emptying. This is the hidden motive for the invasion of Poland. September 1st, 1939, Hitler launches the Blitzkrieg. He does not attack because Germany is ready. He attacks because Germany is running out of time. It is a desperate gamble against the clock. Either the Wehrmacht conquers quickly and seizes foreign resources, or the entire Nazi system collapses under its own weight. At first glance, a superpower, but in reality, a hollow shell. Compare this to the German Empire in 1914. When the British Navy imposes a total blockade, Germany is cut off from global trade. Yet they fight for 4 years. They sustain 4 years of massive artillery barrages. They consume millions of shells every month. They feed massive armies on 2 fronts simultaneously. They replace hundreds of thousands of casualties. They maintain the railways. They keep the industrial heart beating. How did they last? Pre-war investment. Before 1914, German scientists developed the Haber-Bosch process. This allowed them to synthesize ammonia for explosives. Without this chemical breakthrough, they would have run out of gunpowder in months. They find substitutes for rubber. They ration food with brutal efficiency. They survive because Imperial Germany had economic depth. The footage from 1939 shows a different story. The Nazi economy is a stopwatch counting down to bankruptcy. The Reich is a parasite that must consume its neighbors to survive for another month. But there is a problem with this logic. Something is wrong. September 1st, 1939. The newsreels show endless columns of tanks, but the cameras lie. The Panzer divisions rolling into Warsaw represented only a tiny fraction of the German army. In reality, the bulk of the Wehrmacht moved at the same speed as soldiers in 1914. Why did the Blitzkrieg look so slow? It was a matter of logistics. Most of the army moved even slower than their ancestors because they relied on animals. The numbers are staggering. Nearly 3 million horses and mules served the German military during World War II. At any given moment, 1.1 million horses were active in the ranks. They hauled artillery, carried supplies, and moved infantry gear. It was a massive operation powered by muscle and hay. The cost was high. Records show that 750,000 of these animals were killed in action or died of exhaustion. The propaganda films focused on steel and engines. But behind the lens, the German war machine moved at the pace of a horse-drawn wagon. This was not a tactical choice. It was not a love for tradition. Germany simply could not afford to mechanize. The reason was a lack of three critical resources: oil, steel, and rubber. The industrial reality was bleak. They did not have the fuel to run 1 million trucks. They lacked the factory capacity to build them. They did not have the rubber required for millions of tires. The modern army was a facade. Contrast this with the past. Imperial Germany in 1914 moved its entire military by rail. They possessed one of the most extensive railway networks on the planet. Every locomotive, every rail car, and every mile of track was built in German factories. It was a system designed for one purpose: rapid mobilization. It was fast, it was efficient. Most importantly, it was sustainable. The 1914 army was a domestic powerhouse. By 1939, the situation had regressed. Nazi Germany relied on horses because they lacked the raw materials for a modern motor pool. The shortage of trucks forced them back into the 19th century. Then there's the issue of the Navy. In 1914, Imperial Germany possessed the second most powerful fleet in the world. The High Seas Fleet featured modern dreadnoughts and heavy cruisers. These ships could directly challenge the British Royal Navy for control of the oceans. Those ships took decades to design and build. They were the product of a stable, long-term industrial plan. In 1939, that naval power was gone. The footage shows a modern force, but the facts show a desperate struggle for resources. Events accelerated. The facade of the Panzer divisions could not hide the truth forever. The war was being fought on horseback. The logistics failed. Thus ended the myth of total mechanization. September 1939. Nazi Germany possesses a massive investment in its military, but the Navy is lagging. The fleet consists of only a handful of battleships and a few heavy cruisers. The submarine force is small. Admiral Erich Raeder stands in the Chancellery and repeatedly warns Adolf Hitler. His message is clear. Germany is not ready for a naval war with Great Britain. Plan Z is the blueprint for the future. It aims to build a fleet capable of challenging the Royal Navy on the high seas. But the timeline is the problem. Construction will not be complete until 1948. The schedule approved in early 1939 explicitly states this date. Why did Hitler ignore his admirals? At first glance, he was reckless, but in reality, he believed he could bypass a naval confrontation entirely. Hitler invades Poland. He does not plan for a long, grinding war of attrition. His strategy relies on a series of short, violent bursts. He intends to knock out Poland in weeks. He intends to knock out France in weeks. He intends to knock out the Soviet Union in weeks. The goal is to seize foreign resources before German reserves run out. The strategy works in Poland. The campaign lasts 5 weeks. It works in France. The French army collapses in 6 weeks. But then comes the Soviet Union. General Franz Halder, chief of the Army General Staff, records every move in his diary. His entries from the first weeks of the invasion show absolute confidence. The Soviets are collapsing. The maps show massive pockets of trapped troops. Victory is only weeks away. But the situation changes. By December, Halder's tone shifts completely. The cold sets in. The advances stop. The diary entries become grim. June 1941. Germany invades the Soviet Union with 3 million soldiers. They bring 3,000 tanks and 2,000 aircraft. It is the largest military operation in history. The plan was simple: destroy the Soviet Union in a single blow. The footage shows endless columns of men marching east. The sound of thousands of tank engines fills the air. The German command believes the Red Army will shatter under the pressure. But the Soviet Union does not collapse. The Blitzkrieg hits a wall of geography and manpower. The short war ends. The long war begins. Events accelerated beyond German control. There was no turning back. Thus ended the era of easy victories. 8 weeks. That was the timeline to dismantle the Soviet Union. The plan was simple. Seize the grain of Ukraine, capture the oil fields in the Caucasus, take the factories in Western Russia, then pivot west and finish Britain. Why did the German High Command believe this? They relied on the speed of the Blitzkrieg. But reality was different. The diary of Franz Halder reveals a dual reality. In July and August, his notes show confidence, but between the lines, the truth emerges. He records the math. The logistics are impossible. Fuel supplies are inadequate for the distance. Ammunition stocks are too low for a long war. Hitler ignores the reports. He orders the offensive to continue. The footage from late 1941 shows the result. German tanks crawl through thick mud. By early December, the front line sits 12 miles from Moscow. Officers stand in the snow. They look through field glasses. The towers of the Kremlin are visible. But the city remains out of reach. December 5th, 1941. The situation reverses. The Soviet Union launches a massive counteroffensive across the entire front. The weather becomes a weapon. This is the coldest winter in 200 years. Temperatures drop to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. German soldiers are wearing summer uniforms. They have no heavy coats, no thermal boots. The oil in tank engines freezes solid. Rifles jam as the grease turns to ice. Then come the Siberians. These are fresh divisions. They are professional soldiers. They are trained for sub-zero warfare. They wear white camouflage and quilted uniforms. They move on skis. The German offensive stalls. Then, the retreat begins. This was more than a local defeat. It was a strategic disaster. At first glance, a temporary setback, but in reality, the end of the Blitzkrieg. Suddenly, Nazi Germany faces its greatest fear, a long war of attrition, an enemy that can replace every lost soldier, an enemy with endless resources, a nation that refuses to collapse. Events accelerated toward a different ending. The war would not be over by Christmas. The German army began to bleed out in the snow. 1914 to 1918. For 4 years, Imperial Germany fought a war on 2 fronts against the combined power of Britain, France, Russia, and the United States. They faced a total naval blockade. The Royal Navy strangled global trade. No food entered. No raw materials arrived. Yet the Kaiser's army held out for 48 months. How did it end? It wasn't a total military collapse on the front lines. The Hindenburg Line remained a formidable barrier. German soldiers still stood on foreign soil in France and Belgium. The end came from within. Internal revolution broke the government. Sailors in Kiel mutinied. Workers walked out of the factories. The political system shattered before the army did. Economically and militarily, the Second Reich had endured the impossible while being outnumbered and isolated. But Nazi Germany is different. They cannot sustain even 12 months of this pressure. By 1944, the situation is terminal. The regime is scraping the bottom of the barrel. The footage from this period shows the reality. Old men and teenagers are being pushed into uniform. Resource stocks are empty. Synthetic fuel plants are burning under constant Allied bombing. The sound of Soviet artillery is getting louder every day. There is no longer a strategic reserve. There is no blockade-running fleet. The Third Reich is a hollow shell compared to the imperial machine of 1914. Events accelerated. The industrial heart of the nation stopped beating. At first glance, a massive empire, but in reality, a corpse. The collapse was no longer a question of if, it was a question of weeks. The machinery of war simply ran out of oil. The end was silent and absolute. Bottom of the barrel. That was the state of the German manpower pool. Teenagers and old men were conscripted into service. Logistics collapsed. Fuel shortages grounded the Luftwaffe. Tanks remained immobile without gasoline. The industrial base was bombed around the clock by Allied planes. Factories burned. Production slowed to a crawl. But the strategic position tells an even clearer story. Imperial Germany in 1914 could count on its allies to fight. Nazi Germany in 1939 cannot. The coalition is a hollow shell. Japan is fighting its own war in Asia. They are too far away to help in Europe. In the frame, maps of two different worlds, one in the west, one in the east. They do not touch. June 1941. Germany invades the Soviet Union. Japan does not join the offensive. They are focused on Southeast Asia and the Pacific. But there is another reason for this silence. The Battle of Khalkhin Gol in 1939. Soviet forces decisively defeated the Japanese. The footage shows burned-out tanks in the Mongolian dust. This defeat convinced Tokyo that fighting the Red Army was too costly. Japan signed a neutrality pact with the Soviet Union in April 1941. This happened just 2 months before the German invasion. Why did Hitler's ally sign a peace treaty with his greatest enemy? Because Japan chose survival over the Axis Pact. Germany fights the Soviet Union alone. There is no second front in the east to distract Stalin. The plan for a quick victory vanishes. Italy is worse, much worse. June 10, 1940. Mussolini enters the war. But the Italian army lacks modern equipment and motivation. Instead of an asset, Italy becomes a burden. Germany now has to spend resources to save its own ally from collapse. At first glance, a powerful tripartite pact. But in reality, a series of disconnected wars. The situation deteriorated rapidly. History shows the result. No coordination, no shared oil, no victory.